All right, let's jump right in. Hey, everybody. My name is Logan Lewis. I'm the split ag and 4-H agent here in Montgomery County, and I'll be speaking to y'all today about growing vegetables in a Tennessee home garden. So these are some of the key things you should take away from this presentation. So you should be able to understand the key elements in garden site selection and when you might want to use raised beds. You should know the important differences between warm season and cool season crops and the common planting times of those. You should be able to determine if buying or starting transplants will work best for you, your site, and your situation. You should be familiar with seeding and transplanting practices and how to prepare the site for planting using a soil test. You should also be able to contrast different methods of mulching, watering, and supporting plants to meet plant needs and to fit yours and the site's needs. And finally, you should be able to describe some common practices that can promote stewardship in the home vegetable garden. All right, site considerations. First, let's talk a little bit about choosing the garden spot that's right for you. These are a few of the questions that you should ask yourself when considering where to place your garden or grow site. What's the condition of your soil? How much sunlight does it receive? Are there other previous uses of your particular piece of ground that you should consider? And are there any restrictions on gardens in your neighborhood? So in an ideal world, you would want to have 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. That's going to be suitable for most crops. Some leafy lettuce or spinach crops can exist on less, but your crop yields will suffer. You need to ask yourself if this 6 to 8 hours is morning or afternoon sun. Morning sun is lower in intensity, it's not as powerful, and a few hours of morning sun will provide less total light accumulation than if you had a few hours of afternoon sunlight. So in terms of accessibility, so if your garden is like out of sight, it's often going to be out of mind. So it's best to have a site that's easy for you to see and visit so you can keep it a part of your everyday routine, like your everyday life. Slope. You don't want too much steep slope in your garden spot because exposed soil will erode over time. It'll erode away with rainwater. But a slight slope can help it can help cool air drain away during certain times of the year. You do need to keep in mind, though, that if you have a building or something blocking the airflow right below your garden spot, that can create a frost pocket, and that cold air is unable to escape. All right, so size. You want to start small and increase your size as you gain experience. A common issue for beginning gardeners is being overwhelmed. So there's no need to feel like you need to compete with your neighbor. You don't need a half-acre garden so you can grow everything that you could possibly think of to put in the pantry. Just start small, and as your experience increases, you can increase the size of your garden, and that'll just it'll stave off a lot of headache and keep you from getting frustrated. So with air, it's good to have air moving through your site, but you don't want like whipping winds, like if you're on a sheer cliff face or something. Um, Air movement helps dry, plant foliage, and that'll kind of help stave off disease. But these whipping heavy winds can cause a loss of water, and they can also damage your plants and stress them. So when it comes to your soil, you want the soil in your garden to be easily workable. You want it to be well drained. You don't want it to crust after rain. It should also be deep and fertile. So in practical terms, do you have a dark layer of soil a few inches near the surface of the ground there? It's best to have 6 to 8 inches of topsoil. So let me grab my laser pointer here. Looking at the soil profile here, your A horizon, this is going to be your topsoil for what is your surface soil here. Your B horizon will be your subsoil. And then your C horizon, hopefully you never see that. Um, Topsoil And well, I don't know how to get rid of this laser pointer. Oh, there we go. So topsoil is going to be your best bet for gardens in terms of the ability to drain and hold water and nutrients. Often, oftentimes you'll find that you'll have a mix. So if you have, higher areas on your property, you may have less topsoil, and on the lower areas or at the bottom of a slope, you may have more where topsoil has eroded away and gathered near the bottom of the slope. So if you only have subsoil, you can still grow a garden. It has fewer living organisms and less organic materials than both the A and O horizons. And so it can't really support the growth of plants very well. But you can, however, amend the soil with organic matter and other essentials to make it more favorable for growing a garden. But you have to keep in mind that process is going to take some time. It's going to take time for your amendments to be incorporated in the soil. In practical terms, organic matter is made up of previously living plants and animals decomposed by soil microbes. Organic matter causes soil particles to bind and form stable soil aggregates, which improves soil structure. And with better soil structure, water infiltration through the soil increases and improves the soil's ability to absorb and hold water, as well as reduces the potential for surface crusting of the soil. Small percentages of organic matter can make a big difference in your garden's performance, but it's important to know the source of any organic matter that you use. So make sure there's no weed seeds or metals or residual herbicides, as this can definitely cause you some headaches. All right, so are there other materials in the soil that might interfere? Previous uses of your garden site could really be anything. It could have been a pasture or a hayfield or some sort of other farming operation. And this brings up the potential for residual herbicides left over in the soil. Or, say you live in a new construction housing area and you got a bunch of new houses. So there could be trash and leftover construction materials. There could still be some pesticides, etc. So just take this into consideration. And then you also need to see if there are any restrictions on gardens in your neighborhood. So say you have an HOA, that's a possibility with people that live here in town. The main restrictions on garden sites could really just be homeowners associations. They might restrict food production or garden structures. So you might want to check on that before you get started. All right, so whenever you're selecting your garden site, have you noticed that rain soaks in, or have you noticed that it's running off? So how your garden spot reacts to rainfall or watering can be a good indicator of the quality of the soil in that area. You want your site to be well drained, and sites that are well drained will allow water to soak in during moderate rain events. So if you see water standing in your potential site, poorly drained soils are more likely to have standing water in low spots. So with slope sites, if you have poor drainage, you're more likely to see signs of erosion. So like little small channels or gullies cut through the ground, and that's gonna be a real indicator that you're having way more runoff and that your topsoil doesn't drain very well. All right, so is your soil easy to dig in? And do you see plant roots growing several inches down in the soil? Compacted soils will be difficult to dig in, and there's not going to be very many roots because there's not enough space between those little soil particles for roots to grow in effectively. All right, so existing vegetation can also be used as an indicator of soil and site selection quality. So what's growing on your site now? Is it you have do you have grass, or is it mostly weeds? Is it bare ground? Can you see big old chunks of rock sticking up? The types of grass and weeds that would indicate compaction and general poor soil condition are some of these down here. Let me grab my laser pointer again. All right, so if you're looking in this picture right here, this is a picture of Dallas grass. Dallas grass can indicate compacted soil. And then we're going to look over here and we'll see nutsedge. This can also indicate compacted soil and soil that's just not very well drained. Dandelions, much of the same. That's an indicator of compacted soil. But interestingly, like dandelions have a taproot that can kind of help break up soil compaction. If you see them, you know you've got some issues, but at the same time, I guess they might be helping you out. So if you want to leave them alone, you can. If you want to get rid of them, get rid of them. But they can also be an indicator of low nutrient availability, specifically calcium. And then if you look over here at this last picture, we've got a picture of some crabgrass. This is again going to indicate that you've got compacted soil and poor nutrient availability. All right, you got to think about how you're going to get water to your garden site. You need to take into consideration water availability. Do you have a source of water? Do you know what the quality of that source of water is? Is your water source capable of delivering enough water to your site? Do you have enough pressure? Do you have enough volume? Can you connect a hose to this water source to make it easier to get through the garden and water, specific plants or specific rows? Or just, I mean, basically just keeping you from packing 5-gallon buckets, even if you do have a water source close. This is oftentimes overlooked, but you really need to consider yourself and people that are going to be helping you whenever you choose a garden spot. How much time does it take to get to your site? Can you see it? And is it easily accessible? How far away from the house is it? Is it right out the back door? If you have, I mean, I would personally prefer to have a garden spot that's just like right outside the house, so you can watch it from a window, and if you need to get out there, you can just step right out the door and be right there. All right, so you've been taking this into consideration. You've been looking out the window, and you're thinking, man, I don't really have very good soil. The first thing you need to do is take a soil test. You need to, I mean, this will kind of help you develop a baseline and let you know where you're starting from. It's going to give you somewhere to, or some way to address the pH and nutrient levels by giving you that baseline so you can get your lime and your fertilizer out there, or add any other sort of amendments to your soil. Or if it's just really, really bad, it'll be like, it'll let you know that, hey, maybe you need to use some raised beds. All right, so whenever you're taking a soil sample, these are some of the tools that you're probably going to need. This right here is a soil probe. If you're going to be taking the samples from, or taking a sample from a large area, or you're dealing with compacted soil, this might be a little bit easier for you. Or you can also use something that you have on hand, like a little trowel, or you can use a shovel. You'll also need a 5-gallon bucket, and you're going to need some Ziploc bags. All right, so whenever you sample, whether it be with a probe or with a shovel, you're gonna sample areas according to their management zone. Really, so in your garden spot, if you look at the second picture here, you're gonna want to take 10 different samples from that small area, and you're gonna want to place them in your 5-gallon bucket and mix them all together real good. And this, I mean, this really is just a good little diagram, because it helps explain how you would go about taking a proper soil sample. Most people, when they're thinking, oh, I need a sample of my dirt, they're just going to go outside and dig them up some dirt and throw it in a bag and call it good. You really can't do that. They need to be taken from the rooting zone of plants that you're going to be growing there. So that's typically going to be 0 to 6 inches depth. You want to take, again, like I said, multiple different samples from each sample area, so you can get a good, accurate representation of the soil that you have throughout the whole area. So once you get them in your bucket, you're going to want to mix them up real well. You want to pull like all the grass and weeds and trash out of it, because that can skew your soil test results. And then you're going to want to get them in your Ziploc bag, or if you've been to the extension office beforehand, you can pick up some of our soil sample boxes and you can put them in there. All right, I just wanted to throw this slide in here. This is a soil submission sheet. This is what either you will fill out, or if you're coming to the extension office, we will help you fill out. And I just wanted you to be familiar with it and just take a look at it so you can see what it is really needed. You can see here that, you just put your information on it. This right here you don't use. This is where you're going to put information about the sample. And then down here you've got crop codes or common crop codes. And then on the back, you'll have even more codes. Okay, so like I was saying, this is the important part. This is really the only thing you need to be worried about. You're going to have to fill out your information here. And whenever you are filling out your phone number and email, especially, make sure it's legible, because the results that you get back from the lab are going to be emailed directly to you. So if they cannot read this, they're not going to know where to send your soil results. All right, so let's move down here to this next box. Over here, you see sample name. So this is what you're going to name the sample of dirt that you've taken. So if you took it from the backyard, or if you only have one garden spot, you want to put garden spot, you can do that. Or if you took it from the front yard, name it front yard. Either way, it's just a way for you to identify that these are the results for the sample that I called, whatever it is that you called it. So you'll put that in there. And then over here, you will choose your crop code. So if you're just doing a basic vegetable garden, you'll put the crop code in there for that. Or if you've got, grass or whatever it may be, if you're just sampling for your lawn, you can put that crop code in there. If you have plants that require different things, say you have acid loving plants and non-acid loving plants, or if you're going to do a vegetable garden and then you also have some plants that like a lot of acid, or you got some blueberry bushes, you can put two different codes in there under one sample, and you can get like tailor-made recommendations for both different types, and you only have to pay for one test. Now this is a little out of date because it does cost a little bit more than that now. All right, so this right here is a web link. I'm not going to click on it because I'm Zoom recording, and I don't know if I'm going to end up on the right screen or be able to get back to the presentation. But if you do want to go to the Soil Plant and Pest Center website, you would type in soillab.tennessee.edu. It's a really good resource. It's got more information than what I've given you about soil testing. You can soil test for farms, you can soil test for lawn and garden. They have links to articles. It's just a really good resource, so I'll check it out. All right, so if you have resorted to having raised beds for whatever reason it may be, so if you don't want to fool around with soil amendments, or you're at a place where you can't grow in the ground for whatever reason, maybe you rent, or you don't have much of a yard at all, or maybe there's even a lot of trash or something in the soil, raised beds. So we're looking at efficiency, warming, draining better, and accessibility. So raised beds can enable gardeners to make the most out of small spaces or properties with restrictions or unusable soil. And you also need to know that you can remove raised beds, whereas it's hard to remove the spot that you tilled up and killed all the grass. And then after the initial cost of building or buying a raised bed, and then the growing medium that you're going to use, your maintenance costs will be lower because of the smaller area that you have to maintain. Raised beds can warm up and dry out faster than growing in the ground, and this can allow for earlier planting It can help prevent the onset of disease because they drain and dry out faster. And they're also easier, I guess, for older folks or people with physical disabilities that aren't able-bodied enough to bend and stoop. And you can reach everything that you grow from the outside of these. So I guess your space use could be considered more efficient. All right, so the next few slides, we'll go over general gardening activities that should be going on at different times of the year. It's just kind of like a broad, I don't know, a broad overview that will kind of help you see the year in a cycle overall. And keep in mind that these are just general guidelines and they're going to vary some around the state because we have large differences in frost dates. Um, your winter and early spring rains can also impact soil moisture and the ability to prepare garden soil, so that can set you back some as well. So in December, we'll be harvesting, any of our fall crops that are still left over. We're going to be compiling our notes and reviewing our notes from the season, and in preparation for making the garden plan for the following year. We'll be checking seed viability of leftover seeds. You'll want to start browsing seed catalogs. Moving into January and early February, you'll be starting to work on your plan for this coming season, and you'll choose varieties for this year's garden. So maybe you've identified some issues with some of the varieties you just got out of your garden, and you want to choose something different. So you'll want to order your seeds early to get the best selection. And sometimes I guess you can price shop that way too. Um, you might be gathering materials to produce transplants or media, or you might be gathering some containers up. And I guess you could start sowing your seeds for cool season transplants. All right, so in February, we'll be sowing seeds for transplants indoors for cool season or warm season stuff that are longer season, like peppers. Um, we could be applying compost or other soil amendments based on our soil results. We can work soil for early plantings. So if your moisture allows for it, make sure you should allow time for organic matter and cover crops to break down. Um, so we'll be sowing our earliest seeds. Some of our earliest cool season crops may be able to be planted just depending where you're at. Kale, onions, mustard, peas. Um, in March, we'll be continuing to sow seeds for transplants. We'll be preparing soil in the gardens and raised beds if we're not already done with that. We'll be planting some transplants of cool season crops such as broccoli, cabbage. We'll be direct seeding a lot of cool season crops like lettuce and radishes, spinach, kale, collards, beets. All right, so moving into April, we'll be continuing to plant successions of cool season crops. Purchase your high quality transplants, harden off your home garden transplants to get them ready for garden planting. Set up your stakes, trellises, cages, row covers. Direct seed some warm season crops like corn and beans. Um, and in some areas in the states, you may be able to plant warm season transplants. Moving into May, transplants of most of our warm season crops are going to be in the ground. We'll be direct seeding some other warm season crops like beans, corn, and okra. And I'm not going to keep reading this because this is just a lot of the same, but you can see that there's a lot of planting, there's a lot of watering and weeding going on, especially succession plantings. We'll be scouting for pests and disease. Let me see here. We'll be harvesting. Continue planting. Now you can see what it is that we'll be up to. All right, so why do we want to make a garden plan? Well, I mean, you can save money, you can save time, you can increase your yield by knowing when and where to plant in the garden, and well-planned crop rotations can help reduce disease pressures. When making your garden plan, make sure it's completed before you start ordering seeds or buying plants. You really don't want to put the cart before the horse on this one. It'll end up costing you money in the long run. You want to put it on paper or on screen. I prefer notebook paper, but graph paper is fine, or you can use Excel on your computer. Uh, but just make sure you've got it done before you start buying anything. You want to be sure that you've allowed for the proper plant and row spacing in your garden plan. Just based off the different varieties that you've chosen to grow this year, and be sure that you've accounted for crop rotations moving forward into future seasons. All right, so what crops and cultivars are best for you? Well, what do you eat? And what do you need? And what has grown well for you in the past? So novelty crops are fun for a while, but we need to make most of our decision based on what everyone's going to eat, what might not be available from other sources, or even for that matter, be too expensive at the grocery store. And what's grown well for us, what's worked well for us in the past. All right, so what's our goal? We can't assume that high production is always the goal of the home gardener. So in agricultural terms, we always want to grow the most crop in the least space. But with home gardeners, we need to realize that there might be crops that they um, highly value that produce lower yields or take up lots of room. So discussing the goal in each individual garden is crucial to help gardeners make decisions about crops that provide them the most value. So generally speaking, regardless of setting, we want to use space most efficiently. So we never want to use more space than what we have to. Some crops take a long time to harvest. Others are harvested in quick succession. Some of them are going to take up a lot of room, and even others are going to be more compact. So using your space wisely and having a productive garden is going to be accomplished before starting any of your seed or planting any of your plants. So when making a garden plan, consider the growing times of your plants. How intensive is the management for the plants you've chosen to grow? And how much time do you want to invest in gardening? All right, so here's a little example for you. Keep in mind that these estimates are based off of recommendations for in-ground traditional gardens. So the spacing can vary some. They're not set in stone, but just some ranges to use as illustration. It's a lot of stuff out there that'll fit in a 10 by 10 garden. I'll break it down for you. So with our bush beans, we're gonna have three rows on a 36-inch spacing and 30 plants per row. And then we're gonna have determinate tomatoes, 3 rows of those, 36-inch spacing, and 4 plants per row. Indeterminate tomatoes, we're gonna have 2 rows of those on a 48-inch spacing. Cucumbers, 2 rows on a 48 to 72-inch spacing. Pumpkins, just 1 row of those, 120 to 144-inch spacing, and 2 plants per row. So here, kale, we're gonna have 5 rows, 24-inch spacing. Radishes, 5 rows, 24-inch spacing. All right, so planting rotations. This chart can be helpful when you're making your garden plan and you're considering your rotations, because we're all going to rotate our crops, right? These are groups of crops that are commonly rotated together for multiple different reasons. There's differences in disease susceptibility, so it'll help break the disease cycle. There's differences in nutrient requirements, differences in physical characteristics of plants. So, like, do they sprawl or do they grow up tall in a small footprint? But these are typically what they're going to be rotated in. Why do we rotate? Well, I touched on that just a little bit already, but it helps break disease cycle. It helps break insect and pest cycles and weed cycles. It supports the use of nutrients at various depths in the soil profile because different plants have different rooting patterns. So when you're talking about rotation length, it really just depends on the specific pathogens that you're trying to get rid of or keep at bay. 3 to 4 is a rule of thumb, but more soil-borne diseases that you have, it's not really going to be as sufficient. All right, and so here's some rotation examples for you, just so you can kind of see it, you know, see it instead of hearing someone talk to you about it. So we've got our 3 little beds here, or 3 growing areas, and 3 over here. And on this one, we've got our grains, we've got vines over here, we've got legumes, brassicas, and leafy crops. And then we've got our fruits and solanaceous plants and our root crops. And so this is year 1, and now we're going to look at year 2. And so, like here, we just rotated our grains down, rotated our solanaceous crops up, and our legumes down. And we're just making sure that we're growing different crop groups in different areas every year. And there's the full cycle. So how are gardeners selecting the varieties that they want to grow? I'd say that most people are going to select their varieties based off of tradition or experience they've had with certain varieties, disease resistance, what tastes good, so flavor, and what the different varieties look like. So disease resistance can be crucial. Uh, all American selections have been demonstrated to be productive in many areas in the US, but there's no real perfect variety for every single spot. So what people around you, what people down the road are growing can be good clues as to what grows well in what area, but there's no guarantees with this. A lot of your older cultivars have desirable qualities, but they can be more challenging to grow based off of things like disease resistance, and pest resistance as well. All right, so some trials that are available to help you out whenever you're trying to pick what you want to grow. Um, this right here, again, like I said, I don't want to leave this presentation because I don't know if I'll be able to get back to it. But either way, this right here is a good link that you can use whenever you go to the All American Selection winners. When you go to that website, it'll show you what have won like variety trials for whatever it may be. And then we've got Tennessee Home Garden Variety Trials, and I'll show you that in the next slide. All right, yeah, I just wanted to quickly share this little snapshot of this publication, and it's going to give you vegetable cultivar suggestions. You can find it online with a quick Google search. So you have everything sorted by crop right over here. And then they give you information about the cultivar and the description of the cultivar. And they give you resistance, intolerance, and days to maturity, and they give you little reasons why you may want to grow it. There are just some good things about it. So moving on to crop timing and planting. So whenever it comes to selecting dates for planting, these are a few things you want to keep in mind. You want to know the frost-free dates in your area, and you need to remember that those are estimates. You want to know the crop requirements, and you want to know the maturity estimate for the particular crop. Once you've got that down, you can make further adjustments, like if you're growing cool season crops in the fall rather than spring, or if you're using some sort of season extension or like bed covers or row covers or something like that. All right, so cool and warm season crops. These are just some definitions that kind of help you identify the difference between the two. So with cool season crops, they're going to require cooler temperatures to grow and mature properly. Cool season crops are able to withstand some frost. They're also shallow rooted and susceptible to drought. They can be planted in the early spring and fall. Warm season crops, on the other hand, they need warmer weather to germinate. They need warmer weather to grow and mature properly. Frost is going to kill them or stunt them, and they're typically deep rooted and more drought resistant. All right, so in this slide, we're looking at some freeze frost data from the National Weather Service. This can be really useful, and you can find it online. If you'll just do a quick Google search, just Google freeze frost occurrence data, National Weather Service, and you'll probably find this PDF document. All right, let's move into a few examples. I pulled this from, well, let me go back. I pulled this from this freeze frost occurrence data from the National Weather Service. And this is for our area in particular. So what does it mean? So whenever you're trying to determine what all that data means, whenever you see, whenever you're looking at the spring dates and the fall dates, the 90%, that's 90% of the time a frost is going to occur after the spring 90% date, or 9 out of 10 years. So this is a pretty risky date to plant. On the other hand, a frost will only occur 10% of the time, or 1 out of every 10 years at the spring 10% date. In the fall, 9 out of 10 years, there will not be a frost before the 4th of October. That's the 10% date. However, in 9 out of 10 years, there will be a frost before the 90% date. The most hardy cool season crops can be planted 4 to 6 weeks before the frost-free period in spring. And then the moderately cold hardy crops should be planted about 2 weeks before the frost-free date. Notice over here that we've got Irish potatoes listed as cold hardy or moderately cold hardy. Irish potatoes, frost is actually going to kill those, but oftentimes they're treated as a cool season crop because they're planted before the danger of frost has passed and hopefully time to emerge after the danger of frost is over. All right, so here's just a little cool season spring planting example. So say you've got leaf lettuce. So we're going to assume that it's grown from seed. That's 35 days to harvest. It's spring planted, and our 50% frost date is the 14th of April. So what are our planting dates going to be? Well, you'll just want to pull out a calendar and count back 4 to 6 weeks from April 14th. So our planting date estimates are going to be somewhere between the 3rd of March and the 17th of March. All right, and here's a cool season fall planting example with the same thing. We've got our leaf lettuce from seed, 35 days to harvest, but it's fall planted, so we're going to add 10 days for slower growth. Our 50% frost date is October 20th. So what are our planting dates going to be? We'll count back 45 days on our calendar from October 20th, and you will end up with September 5th. So cool season crop maturity dates can be 1 to 2 weeks after the frost date, if they need to be, to make it work in your garden plan for the year. So our warm season crop planting. So our warm season crops can't tolerate frost, and they should be planted after the threat of frost is passed. They germinate and grow under warmer soil temperatures. They need more heat to grow and to mature properly. Beans can be planted a bit before the last frost in hopes that they'll emerge after the danger of frost. Pumpkins, they're typically timed for their maturity date in the fall. Summer squash, cucumbers, corn, tomatoes, they're often planted multiple times so we can spread out our harvest time and lower the risk of disease wiping out our whole crop. And then we've got sweet potatoes and okra and watermelon. And those are often the latest planted in the spring. All right, so a warm season example. We've got bush beans, that's 55 days to harvest, and they're spring planted. So when do we plant? Because beans are direct seeded and require some more time to germinate and emerge, it may work fine to plant at the 50% chance of frost-free period. However, if these were transplants of peppers or tomatoes or something else like that, then it'd probably be better to use the 90% date. So our planting date estimates are going to be April 15th to April 30th. All right, so we've got another warm season example here, except this is going to be fall planted. So we're looking at zucchini, 50 days to harvest, and you need to add an extra 10 for slower growth. And our 50% frost date is October 20th. So when are we going to plant? We're going to count back 60 days from October 20th, and we'll end up with August 21st. The warm season crop maturity date should be 2 weeks or so before the frost date, just to give you enough time to harvest a reasonable amount of produce. So our last planting date estimated would be probably, I don't know, August the 7th or so. All right, some other considerations: consecutive plantings or season extension methods. Many direct seeded crops like lettuce, spinach, radish, beets, carrots, etc., they're planted several times. This can spread out the harvest through the season and reduce the risk of total crop loss. If you're doing multiple plantings, you may take more risks with earlier or later plantings, knowing that if crops are damaged by frost, there'll be more coming along shortly after that. All right, season extension. So a hoop or a cover can keep you going even longer. This could add a couple weeks to your growth season, just depending. If you're using one of these methods, though, you'll need to factor this in when you're making your garden plan and planning out your planting dates. Seeds versus transplants. So the main reason transplants are used is to reduce time to harvest in the garden. So the main crops that are transplanted are going to be your longer season crops. Some seeds are also harder to germinate due to temperature or other requirements. So, for example, peppers would be hard to direct seed because of the high soil temperatures that they require, and they're also a longer season crop. Uh, Many smaller seed crops that are more challenging to plant and establish in the garden, those are also grown as transplants. And you really want to consider how well plants respond to transplanting. So whenever you're transplanting, that can disturb your plants with sensitive roots. So really, you could just think of anything like from the curcubate family. A lot of your diseases can be transmitted by seed. So check um, your seed dealer. It says reputable dealer there whenever you're buying seeds. You might want to check their screening process. You want to buy 1 or 2 years worth of seeds. Even whenever you store seeds well, older seeds can be lower in germination and they can be reduced in vigor after germination too if you're trying to use them. And then you need to store your seeds appropriately. You want to keep your seeds stored tightly sealed to keep out moisture. The goal is cool and dry. So temperatures between 32 and 41 degrees are good. So the refrigerator, you can use that. Silica, as well as milk powder in a cloth pouch, could work to absorb moisture. All right, so these are some of the things you want to look at whenever you're buying transplants, say from a nursery or a big box store or Walmart, something like that. You want to look at the leaf color, look for pests and disease. You want to look at the roots, the health of the roots, and you want to see if you have any issues with plants being root bound. So many diseases and pests can be transmitted by transplants as well. So you really only want to buy these from a trusted source. Do your plants look healthy? Are they drooping or yellowing? This could indicate too little water or not enough nitrogen. You also want to look at the underside of the leaves to check for things like aphids. You want to keep the pests out of your garden. Whenever you're looking at the roots, you want to make sure they're a nice, healthy white color. So small containers with roots that look that looks like they're circling around the inside of the container or the bottom of the plant. Those are going to be older plants. They're going to be root bound. Um, you want the transplants that are healthy and growing and not stretched to the point that whenever you put them in the ground, the transition time will be extended. Um, if you've got plants or if you bought plants that are root bound, or say you're looking at them at the store and you decide to buy them anyway, you really, before you put them in the ground, you want to break up the root ball and make sure that you're supplying them with enough nutrients or whatnot to help get them back on track. All right, so this is bacterial leaf spot. Um, it's a seed-borne disease that can be easily spread. So if infected plants are brought into your garden, so if someone's offering you free plants, don't bring home free plants if they look like this. Uh, Everyone remember, there's no such thing as free lunch. If someone's offering it to you, there's a reason why that they're offering it to you for free. All right, going over some materials for starting transplants. You're going to need some growing media, you need sterile containers, and you need a spot to do it. Now, you may enjoy producing transplants just for the simple fact of making your own transplants, but usually you'll want to focus your time and attention on cultivars that you can't find elsewhere. Transplants can be challenging and frustrating. So if you can find what you want at at a nursery or a nearby garden center, then that may be your best bet as you're getting into growing a home garden. But if you're going to do it anyway, make sure you're purchasing new growing media. Your transplants are valuable, so you don't want to take a chance on old media. Uh, Germination mix will have a very fine texture to keep seeds moist and be easy to seed into. So this image back here is a mix that may be transplanted into at a few weeks of age. All right. Well, it looks like I've got a duplicate slide there. I forgot to take one out. All right, so your growing media, it needs good aeration and drainage. So you want to add some perlite. This will help with that. You don't want any pests or disease. So make sure whenever you're sourcing your base materials, you source them from a place you know where they come from and that they're good and sterile. And make sure you have sterile containers to mix it all up in. Make sure you've got good temperatures for seed germination and plant growth. Don't use too much seed. Use the recommendations on the package. You don't want to let your flats or pots get soggy. They need to dry. They need to dry out a little bit between waterings to encourage good growth and prevent disease. And then finally, you want to have good air movement. This also helps prevent the onset of disease. Seeding and transplanting. Many times seeds are initially so close together in like an open flat or a container, and then transplanted again to like a cell pack. These tomatoes here are just starting to grow true leaves and are ready to be transplanted to a container with more room for them to grow. Seedlings with tender roots are generally not grown in this way. For instance, a cucumber or a melon seed, they'll be grown in a larger container and then transplanted from there directly into the garden. So transplant management. Germination temperatures are usually a bit higher than growing temperatures. So make sure you reduce your temperatures or transplants may grow too weak. Air movement is critical to dry out the media and reduce the chance of disease and damping off. A small fan can really be a great addition. So the media should be allowed to dry out on the top between the waterings. Natural light is really the easiest way to grow transplants, but some supplemental lighting may be needed. So like fluorescents and LEDs can be placed over the flats. You can place them, 6 to 12 inches above that. And then you need to be watching your seedlings for signs of stretching. So if the lights are too far away, they'll stretch and they'll grow real tall real quick and be spindly and they'll break. Um, you also need to look for damage from heat, too much heat from these lights. So if your lights are too close. So the time that supplemental lights are used can be adjusted based on natural light that you have available. So if you have sunlight present, lights may only need to be added for 8 to 10 hours. But if you don't have any sunlight present, 16 hours of supplemental light might be needed. All right, so garden site preparation. Uh, Plan for managing grass and weeds if you have any. You need to till early to allow the breakdown of that material, and you need to spray with herbicide. So a great method can also be to till like a previous year and then grow in a fall to spring cover crop prior to planting your garden. You're going to want to remove any debris. So things like rocks, boards, old plant supports, old plant material, plastic packaging, etc. You need to get all that out. And then you need to get everything tilled in well so you have a smooth seed bed to grow your garden in. So you want to incorporate organic matter a few weeks prior to planting. Tilling in lots of plant material right before you plant can cause problems because the soil microorganisms will use the soil nutrients to multiply and to try and break down the plant material. This can lead to fewer nutrients being available for your young plants and seeds in your garden. All right, pre-plant fertilization. Sorry, y'all, I can't talk today. You want to soil test. So send off a soil sample, send it off to the lab, and then following the recommendations on your soil test results, you'll decide if you're going to do a broadcast or a banding application of fertilizer if you need it, and decide what type of fertilizer you're going to use, whether it be organic or a mineral fertilizer. Now, banding. If you don't know what banding is, this option refers to placing the fertilizer in the rows where you'll be growing and avoiding the middles between the rows. This this is just something that can help cut down on fertilizer costs. I mean, you'll get more details on plant nutrition and fertilization in the soils unit, but this is kind of just a connection to that. Do you really have to till? To be honest with you, that's up to you. Tilling can reduce soil compaction, but it can also reduce soil structure. It can incorporate organic matter, but it can also expose organic matter to loss. It can reduce and increase weeds. It's well known that tillage can reduce emerged weeds as well as prevent weed seeds from germinating, but it can also stimulate the emergence of other types of weeds by providing the soil disturbance that they need to come to the surface and germinate. So it really just depends on your site, your soil, and your management preferences. Seeding in the garden. So this image here shows a tiny radish seed right as it's starting to seed. Many crops are seeded directly into well prepared garden soil. To ensure proper germination, it's important to understand planting times, rates, and depth. Planting times correspond to the warm and cool season crops that we talked about before. Seeding rate is important for ensuring that adequate plants are present to provide yield, but also to prevent overcrowding that can reduce yield, increase management time, and disease risks, as well as wasted seed. Seeding depth is important to enable the seeds to take up enough water to germinate and begin rooting at the proper depth. It's common to seed small seeds shallower than larger seeds. So your seed bed should have soil that's moist, crumbly, and fine so that seeds have good contact with soil to quickly take up water. And so just like a general rule of thumb is to plant seeds at a depth that is 2 to 4 times their diameter. For good germination, seeds are going to require adequate moisture and temperature. So watch the forecast and try to time your planting date to the desired conditions. Transplanting seedlings successfully depends on having quality plants that have been hardened off. It also relies on choosing a day and time when the least stress will be applied to the plant. So transplanting on a cloudy day or during the late afternoon or evening can reduce daytime heat and light stress on younger plants. Good soil preparation and moisture content will aid in making sure you've got your plant started well. Most seedlings are placed in the garden soil right at or slightly below the soil level in the current container. So tomatoes, if they're not grafted, can be buried slightly deeper as they will root from the stems. A good starter fertilizer and consistent water after transplanting will help reduce stress and support early growth early on. All right, so managing your vegetable garden. General water requirements. Gardens typically need 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week, and raised beds are going to require more water because they're going to drain more quickly. How do you know how much rain you got? Well, get you a rain gauge. You're going to need one of those. That'll help you keep up with how much water you're getting from rainfall on site. You want to check that gauge frequently and record the rainfall that you're getting. And this will help you time your garden irrigation. So oftentimes in the summer, there's rains that just kind of wet the ground, but don't do much else. And if you got a gauge, it's going to show you just that. Factors that influence water needs. Plants need an adequate supply of moisture throughout the growing season. Um, the amounts may vary according to the individual crop, the age of said crop, the current soil moisture, the soil type, and weather conditions. So you've got 3 main types of watering systems that are going to be easily available to you or options for you. when you're creating your garden. The first one is going to be overhead. An overhead watering system is one in which plants are watered from over the top of the canopy of the plant. So something to keep in mind with this is that with overhead irrigation, the foliage of the crop gets wet. So if the leaves remain wet for an extended period of time, and that can be anywhere from as little as 10 and up to 24 hours, this can cause problems with fungal growth and bacterial disease, and just put pressure on your plants in that way. All right, furrow irrigation. Furrow irrigation uses the furrows between planted ridges. So fields may be of various shapes. First, the soil is prepared into vertical channels or furrows and planting mounds. Then water is released directly into each furrow, running down the furrow's length and seeping into the soil at the root level. When using furrow irrigation, water is lost to surface runoff, groundwater, and evaporation, and it can be challenging to get water evenly to an entire area with this method. Furrow watering can be a more attractive option, however, if you're using rainwater collection or other low pressure gravity fed water as your garden watering source, and your rows are short and have a little slope. So drip irrigation. Drip irrigation will help you conserve water and only really use what you need. If you're using drip irrigation in a plasticulture growing system, the foliage of your plants is not going to get wet, and this is going to help reduce the chance of disease. And plastic row covers will help prevent some evaporation of water as well, so you can also conserve in that way. Drip tape applies water evenly across an entire grow area. Um, and then fertilizer applications are going to get a lot easier for you if you're using a fertigation setup in a drip irrigation system. And these are some of the things you're going to need for a drip system setup. You're going to need a supply line to get water from your water source to the tape. You can get different kinds of tape, and you can get the spacing of the emitters can vary between different types. You may need some type of filter if your water source has a lot of sediment in it or it's not very clean. You're also probably going to need couplers and elbows. You're going to need a punch, a shutoff valve, in case you're doing multiple varieties of or different things in your garden, and not everything needs the same amount of water. So this drip system is probably not the best option if you have a lot of rocks in your soil, because you're going to tear your drip tape during the installation. I know, especially if you're using plasticulture and you're using a plastic lay-in like machine on the back of a tractor or something, typically it'll pull the drip tape in under it during application. And like I was saying, whenever you have rocks, this kind of application, that's what's really going to lead to the tearing and the breakage. These are just some important notes for you here. So be aware of more than just the surface wetness of the soil. You want to check to make sure you have moisture at a depth of 4 to 6 inches to determine your water needs for your crops. So the depth of a shovel can be a good indicator. If you're dealing with new transplants, you may only have to water 1 to 3 inches. All right, let's look at weeding. The best the best weed control you got is prevention. So you really want to start clean. You want to keep your border areas clean. That'll reduce the weed seed that's getting into your grow area, and you want to prevent the seeds like from just getting in your garden. And you can use mulches. And then you've got your control of weeds after you've already got them. You've got three main types. You've got cultural control, which is there's going to be things like crop rotation or cover cropping and maintaining good soil fertility. You've got mechanical, that's going to be your hand weeding or weed eating or mowing. And then you've got chemical options like herbicides. I know when you're growing a vegetable garden, you typically have a bunch of broadleaf plants. So you're probably going to want to use some sort of selective herbicide that's not going to, like, you can't use glyphosate in your garden because glyphosate's going to kill anything that's green. So keep that in mind. All right, let's talk a little bit about mulching. So mulching can reduce your cultivation labor. There's not really much need for tillage or weed control chemicals. Soil absorbs water. It'll help your soil absorb water better and to retain water better. It's going to reduce evaporation of water out of your soil. It'll prevent some soil crusting and erosion. It'll keep your soil cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. It'll also help improve root growth and nutrient availability, and it will help reduce disease spore movement from the soil to the plant. You do want to keep in mind, though, not to mulch your warm season crops too early in the spring because you could be slowing down your growth by keeping the soil cooler later. All right, so these are some of your natural options whenever it comes to mulches. You can use things like hay or straw, pine needles, pine bark. You can use other wood chips, um, leaves, newspaper, cardboard, etc. You do want to be aware and be aware of whenever you're incorporating these types of mulches into the soil. These are all high carbon materials, and they'll reduce the nitrogen availability in your soil as they break down and decompose. This can take away nutrients from your plants. So natural mulches are going to help reduce the removal time of old plant material, et cetera, at the end of the season. They're going to be mostly effective in controlling annual weeds. Perennial weeds can often grow through organic mulches and make use of the soil nutrients, especially nitrogen, and they'll compete with the crops for these nutrients. So if left on the soil surface, breakdown will occur slowly and pose less risk of disrupting plant uptake of soil nutrients. So irrigation with natural mulches isn't really going to be required like it would be with plastic, but it's still probably going to be helpful. And here's just a little chart um, that kind of breaks down the benefits and the possible drawbacks of some of your natural mulches. So the microorganisms that decompose wood chips require nitrogen in amounts greater than what's available in the wood chips alone. Wood chips don't have very much in them to start with. So if additional nitrogen, if you don't mix that with the wood chips, the microorganisms will get to the nitrogen. They'll get it from the soil, competing with the plant roots, and that could hinder your plant growth. And then some inorganic mulch options. That's going to be your black plastic mulch. Um, some of the positives, I guess, of the black plastic mulch or using a plastic culture system is it will help warm the soil in the spring. It'll help warm it up a little bit quicker, so maybe you get plants in the ground a little bit quicker. It's going to suppress weeds. It's really good at doing that as long as you don't have rips and tears in your plastic. Um, Clear plastic, you can get it. It's not as good. You're going to have some weeds growing still, and you're going to have to irrigate um, with any of these plastic options because they're non-porous. And again, we've got another little chart here that goes over some of the benefits and the drawbacks to your inorganic mulches. All right, so when deciding on what type of supports you may need for your plants, you have to decide based on your crop and and the understanding of its growth pattern. You also need to consider how much space you have to support your crop. So with a trellis, in addition to saving space, they allow more light for photosynthesis to occur. So you're going to end up with higher quality crops. You're going to end up with less disease and insect damage. Harvesting is going to be easier, so you don't have to bend and stoop as much. And it's going to be more beneficial for your fruit crops, especially that require pollinators for cross pollination. And the same, also goes for staking and caging. But for trellises, some of your options for setting up a trellis, you can use all sorts of stuff that you got laying around. You can use old cattle panels. You can use construction site temporary fencing. You can use chain link and old pallets. Just keep in mind that it could be hard to get like old dead plant material off of these after the season is over. Ask me how I know, but they work well for bush beans, pole beans, and just other plants like curcubits. Um, and let's see here, stakes. All right, so whenever you're staking your plants, this is commonly used for supporting single plants. You can use them for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, and other upright fruiting crops of the sort. Wooden stakes, if you're going to use wood for your stakes, they should be about 1 inch in diameter. If you're going to use metal stakes, they can be smaller in diameter because they're stronger and they're not going to break or rot. And then caging, if you want to use cages for your plants. Cages are typically used to support the same types of plants as stakes are, so like single plants. When you size them and use them correctly, they can offer more support than stakes, and they don't require any tying the plant off, and that can help reduce your potential for damaging your plants. I guess a downside to caging is the upfront costs are more expensive than stakes. Um, I guess another downside is that you have to ensure that you're using the correct size cage for the plant that you're trying to support, because if you use one that's too small and you have a indeterminate tomato plant and they just keep growing and growing, it'll overload the cage and kind of render it useless, and then you've got your plant all wrapped up in the cage and it's just a big old mess. All right, so real quick, we'll talk about cover crops for gardens. Just a few points here. Why do you want to use cover crops? So cover crops are going to help reduce erosion in your garden spot. They're going to add organic matter to your garden spot. They're going to reduce the loss of nitrogen in the soil. Typically, if you have legumes as a cover crop or whatnot, legumes are nitrogen fixers. They fix nitrogen in the soil. They're going to reduce weeds. They're going to keep weeds out of your garden area. It's not going to provide it with as good of an area or an opportunistic area for them to creep in. It'll also help impact disease cycles, and it's going to alter your water to soil relations. Some options that you have for cover crops are going to be cereals. You can use rye, wheat, oats, legumes, like I just mentioned, hairy vetch and crimson clover. You can use that kind of on the edge there. All right, so to wrap things up, stewardship starts at site selection, your crop and cultivar selection, fertility and organic matter management. I talked about mulching and water management, and then pest and disease management. All right. Thank you all very much. If you've made it to the end of this presentation, man, you're a trooper, because I tripped and stumbled through about the last, I don't know, 10 or so minutes of this. But yeah, so if you have any questions, just reach out to us at the extension office. You can reach me, or you can call Carlo, or you can call Cody. And if you can just ask us whatever questions you got, and hopefully we'll get you on the right path. Thank you.